Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first in a series of bite-sized elementary PG for the elementary teacher. Today, we're going to be focusing on the question formulation technique, a process that teachers can use with students to help formulate questions that can drive inquiry projects, design thinking, any type of learning in the elementary classroom.
And I'm Jen Perry, the Elementary Social Studies Consultant.
And I'm Sheena Bifford, the science consultant.
Okay, so why do this work? Why learn how to implement the QFT with your students? So, children between the ages of 2 to 5 ask about 40,000 questions, but questioning significantly declines as students go to school. Students figure out very quickly that in school, rewards are given to correct answers and not insightful questions. The reality is that teachers, we often dismiss students' questions. We just don't have time to explore them. We have to move on. We have content to cover, and students start realizing that their questions aren't really valued. In fact, teachers spend up to 50% of their time questioning, and we ask about 300 to 400 questions a day. Well, the average student might only ask one question, insightful question, per week. So, what can we do? We know the power of questions. Questions can solve problems. With questions, we can create new things. We can light up the dark. We can dig deeper with our questions. Questioning can connect us. They can take us to new places. They can give us a voice. And questions ultimately can change the world. Those are very powerful reasons to teach our students to be questioners. We know that question and creativity go hand in hand.
Okay, so we're going to quickly talk to you about classifying questions. The first step in getting students to be brilliant at the art of asking good questions is to teach them how to classify questions. So there's three types of questions that we like to focus on. There's a surface level question, there's a searchable question, and there's an open-ended question. A surface level question is a question we know the answer to. A searchable question is a question that we have to do a little bit of work to get to the answer to. We might have to look at some sites online. We might have to read some books. We might have to talk to some other people. An open-ended question is a question that we may never get to the answer of. Think of scientists that are studying specific topics. They sometimes spend their entire career trying to answer one question. That's an open-ended question. So, how do we explain this to the kiddos? We like to use a metaphor that you see here on the deep dive into critical questions. It's a poster and it has some images to go with this metaphor. And basically, the metaphor is that a surface level question is like a puddle. So, we call it a puddle question. We call it a puddle question because when you step into a puddle, you touch the bottom of the puddle right away. So, just like a surface level question, you are going to get to the answer of a puddle question right away. We like to call searchable questions lake questions because just like a searchable question, you have to do a little bit of work to get to the answer of it. A lake, you have to do a little bit of work to get to the bottom of it. So kiddos would have to swim a little bit to get to the bottom, pick up some sand, and come to the top. They have to do a little bit of work to get there. So we like to call these questions lake questions. And then open-ended questions we like to refer to as ocean questions. So like an open-ended question, a question that we may never get to the answer of, an ocean is probably impossible for our kiddos to get to the bottom of. If we were to go to the deepest part of the ocean, it'd be impossible for us to touch the bottom. So we call these questions ocean questions. So once we teach kiddos about the different types of questions, we want to get them to practice asking these different types of questions. So on the other side there's that slide deck. It's green. It's a built lesson ready for you to use with your students. You can just file, make a copy for each kid, or you can use it at the front of the class to model this with your students. You basically have a slide for each type of question. There's a slide for puddle questions. So as a class, you could facilitate a discussion and say, hey, who's got some puddle question ideas? And you can put them up on this slide deck, and then the kids can go into their journals and write puddle questions at the top and write down 5 of their own puddle questions. And you can do the same lesson over the course of 3 days, focusing on puddle questions for the first day, lake questions for the second day, and ocean questions for the third day. It's just really important that you model this with your class to begin with. So this slide deck here could be used for that modeling piece. And then the kiddos always go to their own journal or their own notebook to practice then asking puddle questions if that's what they learned about that day. Or if they learned about lake questions, go to their journal and ask lake questions that day, etc. So that's a little bit on classifying questions.
Awesome. So now we know the why we need to teach our students to be amazing, brilliant questioners, and some technique on how to classify questions to get questions alive going in your classroom. And now we're going to show you a 2-minute video on the QFT, the question formulation technique by Harvard Institute. And we'll share some more resources in just a moment.
Hey there, Aaron here from InquireEd. The question formulation technique, often referred to as the QFT, was developed by the Right Question Institute as a simple step-by-step process that helps anyone produce, improve, and prioritize questions. It's a powerful strategy, and that's why we're here with a 90-second breakdown of how the QFT can work in your classroom. The QFT starts with a Q focus, the spark that jumpstarts the production of questions. The Q focus can be a statement, image, phrase, or situation, as long as it is clear and interesting enough to activate curiosity. One hard and fast rule, though, the Q focus can't be a question. Before you start producing questions, pick someone to write down and number the questions as they come. Then review the rules. Rule number 1, generate as many questions as possible. Rule number 2, do not discuss, answer, or judge any questions. Rule number 3, write down every question exactly as it is stated. Rule number 4, change any statements to questions. Take 4 to 5 minutes to produce questions using a timer to keep you on task. Once you're done, it's time to improve your questions. Set your timer for another 4 to 5 minutes, then categorize questions into open and closed, labeling each with a C or an O. Next, discuss the advantages and disadvantages of both types of questions. Finally, change one open question to closed, and vice versa. Okay, only a few more steps. First, prioritize your questions, setting the timer for 3 minutes and placing an X next to your top 3. Don't forget to discuss why you've chosen them. Afterwards, take another 2 minutes to discuss and plan your next steps, describing what you'll do with your questions. Don't forget to reflect on what you've done and what you've learned. And that's a 90-second breakdown of the QFT.
The QFT may be slightly overwhelming at very first. There's some rules, but the great thing about it is there's so many amazing resources, and there's actually a built-in template with timers for you to use to guide your students. So that goes through all the sections of the QFT and is a really great resource. We have it linked so you can literally use it tomorrow.
And it looks just like this.
So here are some final thoughts on the QFT. We both have used this in our own elementary classrooms. The QFT is really simple. It does spark curiosity and it's student driven. As a teacher, you do have to step back and let your students formulate their own questions. You are just an observer, a facilitator. There is an energy that I know we both have found when you're doing this with your students. There is excitement in them asking questions. And the springboard is really for inquiry projects. You can use it to create social justice projects, environmental action projects, historical, faith and action projects. There's so many ideas. The ultimate goal is for your students' questions to really spark a project.
That's right. It just really creates a space for student voice too to come alive and to create that opportunity to have really authentic learning experiences. So Jen, maybe really quickly we can end by just giving everyone a quick snapshot of what it might have looked like in your Div 2 classroom.
Okay, I often used it when I was starting a unit. So I would find a QF focus, often an image or a quick video. Remember, it can't be a question. So I would use images or videos relevant to topics that we were starting in social studies or science. And then my students worked in groups to come up with questions. I recorded their questions, and we started an inquiry board based on that topic. It was a really great way to start a unit.
Awesome.
And I know you're more of a Div 1 teacher, so what were some ways that you use QFT with your younger students?
Yeah, so it was similar in the sense that we had a theme or a topic that we were looking at and talking about. And I just became more observant of the questions that my kiddos were starting to ask. And so what I started to do is I started to think of more of a general question when I was first introducing an idea or a topic. And then I was just taking some notes on the side of questions that I heard my kiddos ask. And what I did is I eventually used a bulletin board in my classroom. So literally like a whole wall, because my school was old and the walls were bulletin boards. And I would put up the guiding question, and then I would write out or type out the kiddos' questions, and I would put them up on the wall too. And I kind of created a story map, a mind map with all these different questions. And then what I started to do is I started to take photos of the work the kiddos were doing that answered some of the questions. And I started to put those up on the bulletin board. And eventually it just became a display of the process. So I never actually took my kiddos through the QFT because they were quite little. But I did teach them the different types of questions, and I started to model those questions with my kiddos, and we started to rephrase questions together. But whenever I found those really good open-ended questions or searchable questions, they went up on my wall and we started to work to answer them. And I collected as much evidence as I could, and I just put it up on that board to make it visible to the kiddos. And something really fun with that is that they saw their learning just kind of come alive and progress as the project went. And they often would go up to the board and point at it and say, hey, that's my work. And they start to have conversations together. And eventually I decided, you know what? That's going to be part of student-led conferences, because the kiddos were so proud and were so connected to what was happening on that board. And they could explain a lot of the learning that was happening there too. And this happened for me in a kindergarten classroom and in a grade 3 classroom. And eventually I took it into my own professional work as well when I applied for things like Open Minds. So just taking a question for my Open Minds application and then thinking of all these other questions that we potentially could explore underneath that big guiding question. So not just for me and my kiddos, but also professionally as well. I think there's a space for it.
Yes, definitely. So the QFT, so I think in Div 1, it's maybe a little bit more teacher direction. It's still the students' questions, but you are maybe more of a facilitator, recording down some of their questions, highlighting it. The inquiry wall is such a great idea to really showcase their learning. Another great thing about the QFT is there are so many resources. Our slideshow will be linked in the description of this YouTube video. And there's great resources from the Right Question Institute with examples from every subject from K to 12. So you can really to see how it could look in your classroom. And once again, if you ever need any support, reach out to us. We'll link our email address as well. So thank you for viewing our very first Bite Size PG. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we're definitely going to be doing some more Bite Size PG, so stay tuned.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.